everybody. Good afternoon. I hope everybody is doing great today. I thought that in light of the last couple of days, stuff that I had seen and been tagged in and has come across, that it's a good time to bring this conversation back into play. And so I thought that I would do that. Hello, everybody. I have to say I kind of have my mind changed about Jane prior to all of it, like right at the start, because I had been watching clips that somebody had said, or somebody like had come across my FYP that wasn't about this, like was a totally different clip. And I went, oh fuck, I bet I can find Jane here on TikTok. Let me go and see. And so I had like done a search, and I had gone up and I had looked at stuff. And as I was scrolling through clips, I saw the edited one, right? Where it just states, like you can tell certain things are edited out and everything else. And I was like, that's not Jane. Like that just doesn't seem like her. And so like I had like set it aside. Um, and then I saw everything starting to come across and people starting to use it as a proof. And I was like, okay, I have to go and look and see what she actually said. But I have to say that after sitting with the several different videos on the subject, there's only like 2 or 3, and really the most recent is posted 4 months ago, but I don't know if it's like a year ago or not. That's the one that I actually posted, is one that's 4 months ago. But even in that, the language can be very problematic. And I feel like she feels that the language is problematic. Awesome. Let me flip the thought. I feel like she feels that the language is problematic in that video because I feel like she corrects herself, because she goes on to state that, um, you know, Black people in Turtle Island at the same, before white people developed in Europe, like we all started Black. She goes on to correct it as we all started Black, but she doesn't correct it enough. Yes, and then I really feel that the video or the email response to somebody stating what you're doing is harmful to my people should never, ever, ever be to put the identifier for that people in quotes. If I am telling you that you're erasing me, you don't further erase me by identifying that my identifier, right? It's like if I'm saying don't erase females and you put females in quotes, like, so you're erasing what? Like so I really feel that with everything said, that my opinion has really changed over the last couple days. And I feel like what I heard Brown Girl Pride say when, her first videos, where she was like, listen, I've always had a lot of respect, for Jane and what she's done, but this is problematic, right? And I have to agree. Like, I've always had respect, but I'm disappointed because not only is it problematic, but it's problematic to the point of erasure. I'm not white. Thank you. Nope. And so I feel like at this point, the best thing to do is to remember and uphold, the scientific knowledge that we have, and the indigenous knowledge that we have of who people are uh, at European landing, right? Like what is going on at European landing here in Turtle Island. And there's been a couple of really amazing recent finds proving a lot of so I say proving, but I want to make sure that when I state that word, it is understood what I am stating. Most people don't give a flying fuck if Western science proves shit right or not. The only time proving Indigenous history is correct comes into play is when Indigenous people are trying to state to other people, listen, this is our knowledge, and our knowledge should be fact because it's our knowledge. And it should be fact along that, anyways. Period, at all, whatever. Every people's knowledge of who they were should be considered fact. When you decide that your knowledge of somebody supersedes their knowledge of themselves, you're out of line. Common, right? Common. That's it. That's a base understanding that when you decide your knowledge of somebody supersedes their knowledge of themselves and should dictate their knowledge, then you're out of line, right? So, Indigenous knowledge should be accepted as the knowledge of Indigenous peoples, period, globally. That's all, right? Indigenous knowledge should be accepted as the baseline knowledge of Indigenous people, period, globally. When I state that there are things that Western science proves for Indigenous knowledge, I am not stating it as, hey, fellow Indigenous people, finally, let's show, it's not about that. It's, look, even their own shit is saying what we've been telling them. And here it is. I went into academia so that I could do that. That was the point, to not only um, be able to meet people on an equal playing field when I spoke, when academia is on the stratified level as higher, to not only meet on an equal playing field and so my words would be heard, but because so much about academia and so much knowledge 100% proves global Indigenous people's knowledge that was either stolen or removed from them, right? And in most places isn't even removed yet. Like, there are groups of people across the globe, here in Turtle Island, here in South America, the Sami, groups among the Finn, the Ainu, Inaiu. I always hear it as Ainu is how I was taught it, but I don't know if that's right. In Japan, like, there are globally Indigenous people around the globe, Australia, all around the globe. They're still living Indigenous lifestyles, and still living that connection, right? So, first of all, to discount that as having been lost by everybody is false, right? And when we, let me go ahead, and I'm sorry, I'm trying to put my face up just because of the fact that I get very hand movement, and my expression of thought, I reflect it, or I look at it and reflect it. So when we are looking at Indigenous knowledge, and we can find Western thought, which finds itself superior, right? Western thought has this idea that it is superior, that written language is superior, that their ethics are superior, that capitalism is superior, that their farming methods are superior, that their medicine is superior, right? That their science is superior because they had their science cut off, right, for 1,000 years. And when they had their science eradicated from their groups of people, everywhere else continued on. And in their loss, when they regained it after appropriating science from other people, because metal and metallurgy is absolutely stuff that comes from an Indigenous group of people that is appropriated early on by cities and taken in, right? So when we're looking at those things, we're seeing that when they eradicated it in themselves, they thought it was gone everywhere, right? Not only did they eradicate it in themselves, but they really did try to eradicate it everywhere else. They decided it was a sin. And so, in eradicating it in themselves and eradicating it elsewhere, they decided that it had disappeared, that it didn't happen, that it was never there, because Western thought is so societal centric. It goes along with that othering, their need to create others to maintain power, right? Oh, absolutely. So when they get back science, absolutely, they start appropriating science from indigenous cultures because they don't start seeing science coming back until after they get to Turtle Island, right? It's not until after they see Turtle Island indigenous people carrying on this science in great ecology and in advanced medicine, and they can't equate it to sin like they were able to equate the Islamic nations that were still very advanced in science because Islam never loses science. Um, they equate Islam with sin because God, Christian versus Allah, which is still God, Islamic. So their thought on this can equate it to sin when they can no longer equate it to sin because they named Turtle Island indigenous people from the bat as being the children of God, as being close to God, as being idyllic, as being loving, as being caring for each other. I mean, all of the early documents state this constantly across the board. They view it as naivete, which it is not so much naivety as it is the fact that the horrors that Western thought understands has not been visited for the vast majority of Turtle Island. Of course, there are places that have horrors in Turtle Island. Nothing is monolithic. But because of the fact that it's not within the vast majority of it, and the vast majority of Turtle Island has such a high value placed on human life and life, not just human life, but life. Because of that, the levels of violence that Western thought that has eradicated the idea that any life matters other than white male life. And I mean that. Well, they didn't negate it as or they didn't claim it as white, but any life other than Christian male life did not matter because even God thought that women were lower than cattle on the scale of life, right? Like, so they were just bred, right? So when this group of people meets up with a group of people who place value on life and have high science and high medicine, they start to see um, science and medicine can't be sinful because these people obviously aren't sinful. Okay, everything they've equated as sinful isn't here, right? Sex maybe, but everything they've equated as sinful isn't here. So they can't see them as sinful and they name them as not sinful, and therefore it's no longer sin. Hello, hello. And when they decide to take science back, like to get science within their culture, they absolutely steal not only from Turtle Island indigenous people, but from African people. And they absolutely also steal from the Middle East, right? Because Islam, they stole from Islam a lot. So, and then what they do is they don't have an original thought. They go to Greece, which isn't necessarily an appropriation because like it's Western thought's birthplace area, right? Like, so it's part of Western thought, right? But they go to Greece and they take science from Greece and ancient Rome, right? And then they appropriate it from everywhere else. They don't have an original thought in this. And you see this in the earlier texts of what they're actually studying because they're studying alchemy and they call it alchemy. And they look at it as alchemy, uh, the books that they're reading, the books that they have, the alchemic language, all of these things are written in other languages, right? And combined of other languages, right? They're also mathematical, right? And they didn't really understand mathematical at that level at this time, right? Um, Not because it wasn't understood, because Pythagoras in ancient Greece, Pythagoras Greek or Roman, but Pythagoras had advanced math way, way, way earlier. So um, not that it wasn't understood on a global scale, but it wasn't understood by them. And so when they decided to understand it and discover it, because we know what they do when they discover shit, they decided to take everybody's. And so we absolutely see that new science and new medicine is absolutely an appropriation of everybody else's, mixed with the industrial age, right? Mixed with the age of technology that we're in. And so these advances are absolutely would have happened in every area without the need for that, right? The need for the industrial age and that thought process to come in, because science here was more advanced than it was in Europe and as advanced as it was anywhere else. Husbandry of corn proves that. For me, that one's a huge one because corn and wheat and barley all start out the same. They're all the same size of a plant. right? They all look the same. And yet, in the Middle East and in Mesopotamia and in Egypt, and where all of these things come to being, and we get the development of Western agriculture as removing everything from the biome and then replacing it with a monocrop, right? Which removes all the nutrients, which removes the interaction, which removes everything that the plant needs, right? And replaces it on very meager trickle, right? Um, and corn and wheat go from the same size plant, and wheat goes to what we see as wheat today. Whereas corn here in Turtle Island, where it is in a nurturing environment that's a part of the biome, right? Corn goes to this huge big thing, and sometimes size might matter, right? Like I often am like, wonder if that's why. Well, not wonder if that's why. I believe that's why, right? To me, that makes total sense. That when you remove all the nutrients from the biome and replace it with a monocrop, it can't grow bigger, right? The four sisters. And well, not only that, but every honorable harvest practice within Turtle Island that is documented or still understood by groups today who did not lose it. Every honorable harvest practice is not necessarily a removal from an environment and removing the rest of the environment. It's not like you till the land, right? And pull all the other shit out. Three Sisters definitely does like a mound thing because it's that buildup, right? And you need that buildup for squash, right? And well, these will grow together. They don't generally always grow in a pile like that. So that is some molding and tending of the land that's a little bit more Western agricultural like looking, I guess would be the best way to put it. But it still is very much working in the honorable harvest harmony biome, right? Sustainable biome that doesn't need me to sustain it, sustains itself. It only needs me to come and prune and talk and to that communicative biome part, right? That interactive part. So um we see that that's everywhere within Turtle Island. We don't see that in Europe. We also don't see science and medicine in Europe. And what we really see in Europe at the time is a lack of sanitation. Uh, we know that cities themselves actually cause disease. We know that cities themselves actually cause poor health. And back to the very first cities, like this is fact known knowledge. Like this is anybody in any academic community, anybody in any biological community, anybody in any evolutionary or historical or anywhere else will tell you that city equals disease. And what it is you have everybody piled in. And the more people that you have in a tighter knit space, the smaller space, the more infection rate breeds. The more coughing and sneezing is going to make everybody else sick. The more poor sanitation is going to fuck with people. The less fresh and um, varied your food is, right? All of those things. Yeah. Well, and we did not have diseases here in Turtle Island that we know of, right? Um, all accounts of it showed that there. So I have no evidence of an archaeological history of disease as like cancer is here, of course, things like that, things that are within all bodies, right? Cancer is in everybody's body. We Cancer is just developing cells basically. When they go out of whack that they become malignant and become a problem, right? But so there is some disease here but not infectious disease. That's the best way to put it. There's no infectious disease here, if that makes sense. There's no like common cold here either. um, and this is because of the fact that there is such a high level of sanitation, of understanding what herbs, what interactions with the environment, what nutrients within the environment is better than herbs, what nutrients within the environment will build the immune system, will help in all these different levels. And, like We know our common knowledge is today, like many spices will actually, help the body balance well, right? Like turmeric's supposed to be very good. Honey is a very big positive. We know these things today. Um, so with this, we can see where the understanding of nutrients and the understanding of the environment around you leads to even great cities that we know of here in Turtle Island not having a rate of infection disease, where all other cities that we know of across the globe have a rate of infection disease. Um, to the Joker, the Joker was quite intelligent and had quite an intense amount of information. Where the Joker went kind of sideways was when he's, kind of went into it for himself. Uh, but he was pretty anti-government, and he actually was like smart as a fucking whip. Just saying. I mean, just saying. Um, so when we are looking at the cities that we have documented here in Turtle Island, we are seeing that there's not a high rate of infectious disease or any rate of infectious disease that we're seeing. And part of that is that the cities that we know of here in Turtle Island actually have this sink into the biome. It's the only way I can like in my head, it's the only like it's just pictures this, it's just being a part of the world, right? So if you are living in such a part of the biome around you that you're not trying to change the environment negatively for long term, leave your footprint everywhere, make an impression, right? Personal, right? Like there's changes that you do to the environment that are beneficial to the environment and beneficial to you and beneficial to all the other animals around you, right? Absolutely, there are changes to the environment in the biome. Burning burning prairies or burning undergrowth. This is a huge change to the environment, but these are beneficial changes to the environment, right? If you burn pine trees, then you get your next generation of pine trees. Pine cones actually have to be burned to like open up and release their seeds, right? Like they have to have that heat. Um, so this is an effective cyclic part of the biome that's helpful, but not having to leave this imprint, this I was here, see me forever part of the biome means that there's much. If we're not all in tiny little square houses that are up and next against each other, then there's a space for us to go to the bathroom without it affecting how they're going to the bathroom. There's a space for me to breathe without affecting how you're breathing, right? When we are not um, a part of that extended need to create these little ticky tacky boxes, right? Then you're blending in, then you're a part. And that being a part is highly effective for not having that high rate of disease, for not having that high rate of poverty, right? That's the other thing that you see on the other continents, right? Or at least within Western thought, right? You see within Western thought, there's a high rate of poverty. Another thing that's not documented here in Turtle Island. And again, when I'm talking about documentation, I am not just talking about Western documentation. Absolutely, because everybody wants the Western documentation for their proof, right? I'm bringing in the Western documentation, but I'm also talking about documentation from groups of people who have not had to homogenize with Western thought, right? I'm Turtle Island Indigenous, but I'm globally mixed actually as well. Um, and we're talking about what Turtle Island was pre colonization, pre Western thought landing and starting its destruction. Uh, you're more than welcome to stay in here. You're more than welcome to speak and say things. And if you hear something incorrect, especially if you're Turtle Island Indigenous, more than welcome to point it out. Though I would ask that you point out what's incorrect and why you think so. just so that, because screaming lies at the top of your lungs is never effective for anybody. But that's what we're talking about today, and you're more than welcome to be in here. I am, through Western education, an archaeologist and an anthropologist, as well as in medicine. I've got degrees in medicine as well, though I don't practice medicine these days. But we're talking about pre-colonized Turtle Island Indigenous peoples. And again, and I did not state that at the beginning of this live, but I do like to try and state that I am not here to teach people people's ways. That's not my space. That's not my lane. I don't do that. I also am not going to teach you how to reconnect. Not my space, not my lane. I don't do that. I don't teach Turtle Island Indigenous people shit either. Like, I might give information that I know so that, hello, beautiful, so that people have those tools in their toolbox. But I'm not here to correct or teach Turtle Island Indigenous people either. That's not appropriate behavior to me. But today we're holding space on what Turtle Island was prior to European contact, because of the fact that there is, as is frequent, a lot of erasure going on. And the last couple of days have had a high erasure point. And so I'm trying to ensure that that high erasure point is counteracted. Pre 1492, I count it as Columbus's first contact. And the reason that I count it as Columbus's first contact is because of the fact that Columbus's first contact starts the genocide in Turtle Island. The Vikings' first contact isn't a genocidal contact. I'm sure other people have made it here before. There's records of other people sailing out this way, or thought processes. I don't think anybody who made it here before populated the entire continent. Tales of somebody leaving with 40 people or even 300 people isn't going to turn 300 people into 10 million within 100 years. But do I, there's other contact prior, but we're not talking about other contacts prior. What we're talking about is prior to the contact that starts the genocide of Turtle Island. Turtle Island is one of the phrases used by several indigenous groups, nations along the eastern seaboard of North America to describe their home. And it's an English translation, obviously. It's the one that I use. It's one that many people use. It's become a little bit common usage within indigenous communities, but it is not the only one. It is not the only creation stories are abundant on Turtle Island. I actually learned a new one today, which was an amazing thought process to learn a new one today. Creation stories are absolutely abundant. No, not direct African DNA. So Turtle Island Indigenous people DNA wise, scientifically, current knowledge of the DNA of Turtle Island Indigenous people pre-contact. This is from sites up to 15,000 years old. Okay. So Kennewick Man and there's another one in St. Lawrence, Alaska that's way old, like 15,000. And there's one in Brazil that's 15,000 years old. So analyzing the DNA of those two people and analyzing the DNA of several other burials pre-contact of European in 1492, analyzing all of that DNA shows that there is unique DNA here in Turtle Island. There is a ghost species here in Turtle Island that is nowhere else on the planet. It's a DNA signature that is only found here in Turtle Island. And that Turtle Island Indigenous people have Neanderthal DNA and have Denisovian DNA. And the amount of Denisovian DNA that they have, 0.02 to 0.03% of Denisovian DNA, equates 10,000 years of intermixing with the Denisovians because of the way that we know of interspecies intermixing. So we absolutely see that Turtle Island Indigenous people have a unique set of DNA signatures that is not seen anywhere else on the planet. We also see that Indigenous people in Africa have a unique set of DNA signatures that is not found anywhere else on the planet. The Kwe people and the Oyo people, Kwe of South Africa and Oyo of West Africa, do not have Neanderthal DNA. They're the only peoples that do not, and they have three ghost DNAs in them. And Australians have a ghost DNA in them as well, Australian Indigenous people. Ghost DNAs are ghost species. They've been in the news a lot frequently recently, actually. Are species that we see the fingerprint of their DNA in our DNA, but we do not see them in the fossil record. Or if we might have found them in the fossil record, we haven't been able to get DNA out of them in the fossil record. So everybody has Neanderthal DNA except for the Oyo population and the Kwe population. Everybody, including all of Africa, except for those two populations, including Indigenous Australia. The most is in Asia. I can't remember if it's West Asia or East Asia, but the most Neanderthal DNA is in Asia, which makes total sense because Neanderthal and sapien live together for 100,000 years in the Levant in two caves that are a 5-minute walk from each other, right? In those two caves for 100,000 years is when the vast majority of our intermixing with Neanderthals comes in. As we leave, because the last common ancestor of everybody outside of Africa is 50,000 years ago, which means that that we had departed Africa a little bit up before, but that the people that had departed up before have not continued on genetically. But the last common ancestor of everybody who is outside of Africa currently, with the exception of the Australian Indigenous population, which is 70,000 years old. The last common ancestor of everybody else is 50,000 years ago, current DNA. And as they migrate across, you're seeing that the migration pattern and the mitochondrial Adams and Eves, or not mitochondrial Eves, the DNA Adams and Eves. So the founder of a DNA line moves across as well. This is why you go from L in Africa to M to N to P to Q, right? As the founding DNA populations are moving out, they stay in specific spaces, and we can trace these migration patterns by this. And we can also see that they're moving out across the lower half of Eastern Eurasia because of the fact that at this point of time, the ice melt is keeping them there. We're at the very end of the last glacial maximum at 50,000 years ago. So as the ice is melting and going north, the sea levels are rising. So shorelines that were there are no longer there. Continents that were there are no longer there. And people are migrating across the lower half of Eurasia. And in this migration across the lower eastern half of Eurasia, that the people who would eventually come to Turtle Island spent roughly 10,000 years in this space and met the Denisovians. And the people who would eventually become current West Asia stay in this space and are mixing with the Neanderthals that are already there as well, and the Denisovians. Though we don't see a lot of Denisovian DNA in West Asia, we really only start to see it in East Asia, in the Pacific Islands, in Indigenous Australians, and in Turtle Island. Those are the spaces that we see Denisovian DNA, and how we can, by DNA admixture, trace the migration pattern of Turtle Island Indigenous people, and how there are new studies being done using this to prove Turtle Island Indigenous histories that talk about coming over on boats through the South Pacific, because some creation stories talk about coming here on boats. And so this is DNA proving those specific creation stories correct. There's other things within the DNA, like the ghost species, that proves other creation stories correct, like being created here. So recently, we've had the Cerruti mastodon find, which is in San Diego. The Cerruti mastodon find, over 3 million years old, they have not. The oldest DNA we have found, period, is 2 million years, unless something come out last night. Because the 2 million years as the oldest DNA is a month old. Like, it just came out. So That's awesome, Tlingit. So I think that actually the Turtle Island, or that the creation story placing people here actually, the Cerruti Macedon find to me, or as creating here, actually says that's true. So the Cerruti Macedon find is 130,000 years old, which, knowing that Homo sapiens are not out of Africa and other spaces yet, puts the Cerruti Macedon find as a descendant of Homo erectus. Like Homo erectus becomes Neanderthal in Europe and becomes Denisovian and Florensis and Lanzonsis and Lati and Sapien. Homo erectus making it to Turtle Island, and Homo erectus making it to Australia. There's also a 120,000-year-old find in Australia, and Australians again also have a ghost species within them. Would be species that were created here, that Homo erectus speciated into uniquely for Turtle Island, right? And so to me, the Cerruti Macedon find, I believe, absolutely proves that. So we do have a ghost species here, which means that when Homo sapien gets here, everywhere that we see other species, by the time Homo sapien really meets them, they have become a small group. Our genetic diversity is so high that we're able to breed like rabbits. Other groups did not have the high genetic diversity that we have. And because of that, by the time Homo sapien comes in contact with Neanderthals, it's estimated that there's like a few hundred tops left, right? And so we envelop them. Um, when we meet with Denisovians are now thought to have not died off until 13,000 years ago, which is really recent, right? But when we meet with Denisovians, we see that by this time, genetically, they as well are a very small, lack of diverse species. Um, and I would think that the same thing is going to happen. We see it with Lizonsis, we see it with I don't know if we see it with Nalati. Okay, we've only got a few finds in Nalati. Nalati is amazing, and we're getting more stuff out of Nalati this year. Berger is going to be putting out some huge stuff, right? So, me, are we asking about me? I'm everything. Literally, my direct maternal line ends with Philomene, Philindra, depending on the way it's written, who was a Sudanese slave who was brought here from the Sudan. That's my direct maternal line. Uh, her granddaughters, husband's direct maternal line, uh, was back to Nani of the Red Paint Clan, the Eastern Band of the Cherokee. And then I have another ancestress here in Turtle Island who is Polly, and she's two generations, three generations. And her children were registered as Quapaw, but the DNA signature associates on the West Coast with pre-contact indigenous finds. I use I go to archaeological sites where you can compare DNA. Um, and then like in Europe, it is three or four different like lines that I can trace back in three or four different areas. Um, and then there's it's really everywhere. Like if it goes into the DNA signatures, the DNA ancestry, and I'm not talking like ancestry.com. I don't use those sites for it. Um, actually links me to Sami, to East Asia, to India, to a couple other places in Africa, to Australia, to South America. It's really everywhere. And all the lines that I've traced back, as I trace them back, they just go like this everywhere. I've traced back a lot of my lines. I've done my own research. The research that other people did, I wasn't okay with. And I wanted to make sure that I have my own facts. Um, and I was raised with a second mother who was there from my birth. And she was a member of the Haida community. And so I was raised in Fidalgo as a member or among the Haida community. And I will protocol on that, but not in this public, just because doxing is bad in our area, and so I would not dox family members. But that's part of me. I mean, it's not all of me, but that's a little bit of me. DNA. So, oh fuck, and I took the link trees going down, and I haven't put them up. I use your DNA portal and my true ancestry. Let me make sure I didn't get the year and the my back and forth on that one really quick. And I do need to put them up on my website. I apologize, I haven't gotten them up there yet. I've kind of been not as focused as I should be. Okay, so it is your DNA portal and my true ancestry. There's also GEDmatch will do a really good job, but the ones that I use for direct connect to graves is my true ancestry, and it links you to archaeological sites. GEDmatch has archaic DNA. Your DNA portal has archaic DNA. But really, my true ancestry really has some archaic DNA. But it's expensive for that one. That's the only one that I've really paid for, because the archaeologist in me is like, oh, oh. So that's, but you can get free information on it. You can with all the sites, and with all the sites you had to pay. But with that one, and it's a one time, it's not a subscription with your true ancestry or my true ancestry. But which is unlike the other ones. So in the end, you probably pay less. But it will connect like everywhere. It's just pretty amazing, actually. I'm just answering questions, really. Um, thank you, Keely. I was asked about my heritage, and especially as an Indigenous person, when you're asked about your heritage and you're saying you're Indigenous, you need to qualify what that states. Um, and especially speaking about Indigenous issues. And as I said, if you want names, I'll give you names. I just won't give you names of communities that are still or people that are still very active in communities in public. I don't dox people. But if you want to IM me, and if you can't message me, actually you can get to me through Discord or through the Widda.org site. But if you can't message me in TikTok, you can actually comment on a video and ask me to message you, and I will absolutely do so. Race is absolutely totally made up. DNA is absolutely science. DNA states that race doesn't exist. Literally, that's how we know that race doesn't exist, is because when we look at the genetics, we see that we are more genetically diverse within populations than between populations, which, if you think about it, makes perfect sense, because if we were not genetically diverse within our populations, we'd get inbred, right? When all the genes are the same, we get heavily mutated. And so we are more genetically diverse within populations than we are between populations. You're more likely to have the same genetics as somebody in a population clear on the other side of the globe, primary populations, like original populations, as somebody clear on the other side of the globe, than you are to have the same genetics as your next door neighbor. And that's how we know that race is a pseudoscience. It does not actually exist. Racism 100% exists, and ethnicity 100% exists. People's cultural heritage and family lines is what ethnicity is, right? And family lines and family genetics absolutely exist. Absolutely exist. To say any otherwise would be weird. But in fact, we've learned more and more that not only do family lines and family genetics exist, but what has happened to your ancestors affects you today. That's epigenetics, right? So absolutely, that's real. But race does not exist. It's a social, and I don't like social construct. It is a colonial construct, because race was created with the idea of creating a new way to other people. Okay. Othering is a Western thought concept that gives you somebody else to hate instead of realizing that your government is trying to kill you. It's so God kings can maintain power. This othering concept, this thought process that you should be afraid of or upset with your neighbor or think that it's your neighbor that's causing you all this trauma, when in fact it is the government that's trying to rule you that's causing all this trauma. So othering is something that's developed within that. And race is not the latest form of othering, but it is one of the forms of othering. It comes about roughly about the time we see Western people land in Turtle Island. And it really seems to come about in that time period because where doctrine of discovery and manifest destiny fail um, to provide uh, oh god, I have the word and it's not there, justification for atrocity, race steps in and provides that justification for atrocity, right? Um, and othering does happen within the same race. And othering started like the first understanding that we have of othering starts with the barbarians in the hills are coming to steal your food. So you need to give me your food to feed the army so that the army can protect you from the barbarians in the hills. So let me steal your food instead of the barbarians steal your food, right? And that's, the start of our first cities in Western thought. Um, so absolutely. Uh, and it goes from that to other nations not being as advanced to religion. They're devil worshippers to race. Currently, it's immigrants and houseless, and anybody who thinks differently than you, right? So. Gosh, I don't think I've done a video on othering. That is something I should do. I think that I did when I was talking a little bit on it when I was talking about God Kings, but I can do a video completely on othering. That's a really good idea. So, no, the people that were found when Europeans got to Turtle Island were not phenotypically African. Okay. Or they did not have tightly coiled hair. And the undertone to their skin is a little bit of this copper bronze undertone. So while you do find people that are dark, you do not find people that we would currently, and as you can see in this words from Columbus, even then identify as black. Period. Not only that, but the DNA signatures here in Turtle Island from pre-contact finds, from finds as old as 15,000 years ago, one in St. Lawrence, Alaska, and one in Brazil, from the Kennewick man, who we do have DNA from contact or finds right before contact, like burials right before contact, to the mummies. Okay, all the DNA states that the mitochondrial and Y-DNA lines are not the same mitochondrial and Y-DNA lines that you see in Africa. Okay, and that the DNA signatures of Neanderthal, which everybody except for the Khoi, Khoi people and the Oyo people of Africa have Neanderthal DNA. Everybody, including the rest of Africa, outside of those two groups of people, and everybody, or they have Neanderthal DNA, and then they also have Turtle Island or not Turtle Island indigenous, Denisovian DNA. Denisovian DNA at an amount that shows that they were living with Denisovians for 10,000 years. And they have a unique ghost species DNA. And that unique ghost species DNA is not seen anywhere but Turtle Island. Anywhere but Turtle Island. Anywhere but Turtle Island. Okay? And because we do not see those anywhere, that one anywhere but Turtle Island, no, We are not talking about a group of people that on any level could have been identified as Black. And they were not identified as Black by the Europeans. They were specifically, again, Columbus's words, in his own words, in his journal, specifically identified as not Black. Jane's words are problematic. And I do believe that Jane sees her words as problematic. At the same point, she doubles down and gaslights. So I don't know, but I do believe that she sees her words as problematic to the point that she also states that um, everywhere is Black. Black doesn't exist. We all start Black. White doesn't exist. And that by the time Turtle Island Indigenous people are met by Europeans, Black is not what they're finding, right? And she states this because she states that they are no longer Black by the time white exists. And white exists as a over 50% of the Northern European population at 5,000 years ago. Okay. So she is absolutely not trying to tell you that they were Black, but her verbiage is problematic, and her response to being told by Indigenous people that her verbiage is problematic is gaslighting. So it's problematic. She was given the chance to change it. It remained problematic, right? And so it's problematic. But even if it was, even as something that's problematic, she is not stating that they're Black. She is being problematic in the way that she is stating it, right? And I think that she is erasing Indigenous people, and I think that she is participating in that. And I think that for an anti-racist to not understand the nuance of that is problematic in and of itself, right? And to, as an anti-racist white woman, to not respect Indigenous people's voice on it is problematic as fuck. I still don't think she ever meant to tell you that Turtle Island Indigenous people weren't here, right? So, yeah. Well, and I also feel that, one thing that was identified, I think, for a lot of people during 2020 here is because we had a lot of group meetings. And one thing that was identified for a lot of Indigenous people in this area was that many people who have that disconnect, it costs money to find your ancestry at that point, right? Turtle Island Indigenous people know their ancestry. For many Turtle Island Indigenous people, they can still have a grandparent who can tell them their 10th great grandmother, right? Like they still have that intense connection to their ancestry, to their land, to their family. Whereas many people who were brought over here during the transatlantic slave trade, who their descendants are still here, don't have that connection. My only ability to have that connection is because I paid money. And I didn't pay money for that connection. I paid money because I didn't know my blood father and I was looking for my blood father. That's why I got DNA done. But you have to pay money. And when you have to pay money to know what your heritage is, that's fucked on any level. That's fucked, right? And when you either have to pay money to know what your heritage is or accept that your heritage cuts off a few grandmothers ago, that's fucked. That's hard. That's fucked. And to think of it in any other way ignores trauma and pain that was specifically inflicted, right? And is just as erasing, right? To decide to erase an entire culture isn't appropriate either. You know? But to feel like that, I can't imagine. I don't have to on some levels, right? I do know that I did not know other than Africa where my grandmother had come from, right? And so I do remember feeling that, and I remember seeing the Sudanese and went, ah, like the delight within me of that, right? So but at the same point, I also have so much other ancestry that I knew and I could trace, right? So I can feel this much of it. I can't feel all of it, right? This is Columbus's words. I can't. I'm not changing Columbus's words in any way, shape, or form. And it's also not my video. This is and his name is there. This is Oaf Live's video. Um, but and it's Columbus's words, right? So yes. So your DNA portal and my true ancestry. You know what? I'm gonna just as we're sitting here, let's just do this. I'll be kind of silenty for just a minute here. Let me get you guys those actual websites on my thing. I have the DNA resources side up. I just hadn't actually put in any resources. So let me go ahead and put in these two. Oh no, they're on there. Yay. Okay. So if you go to the website under DNA resources, there are your DNA portal, uh, GEDmatch, and My True Ancestry are all three on there. So if you go to the Widda Ord, it's right there. It's the bottom one that says web, widdaord.com. Under DNA resources, it will link you to those three sites. Yes, that's what I did. I got Ancestry DNA because, again, I was looking for a family member. I was looking for my father, and I wanted to go with a large database that might be able to hook me up easiest. And it's the cheapest out there. Ancestry DNA is problematic in the fact that it doesn't do a whole genome test. And when they're matching your haplogroups. Uh, you can still take that GED file, it's a GED file, and upload it to other sites. And the same thing with 23andMe, and use it to find connections that will give direct ancestry or direct haplogroup ancestry as well. It's problematic in the fact that it doesn't have your whole genome more than anything else, and in the way those sites themselves process it, not in the DNA file itself. I'm a war veteran. The military and the government and all of it has had not only my DNA, but my fingerprints and my everything since at least 2002. I was told when I got back from Iraq, I was on a watch list. And since then, I was in Standing Rock for 6 weeks and in Portland for all of 2020. So they already out to get me. My DNA ain't going to make no difference. I don't know if whole genome is worth it or not. The cheapest one I've seen, I have not tried WeGene. The cheapest whole genome I've seen is $300, and that gets. I'm a disabled war vet. I don't make enough money. I live off of my disability. Um, I do not know which is better for African heritage. So I know. So with the way DNA works, um, I haven't used my DNA to connect my African heritage. I used my aunt's DNA to connect my African heritage. Because of the way it's passed down, and she's my full aunt, like same mother, same father, my mother's older sister. But because of the way the X's and Y's are passed down, there are things that she has that my mother doesn't have, and things that my mother has that she doesn't have. And so, or X's and X's are passed down either or. And so, I see stuff in her DNA that I don't see in mine, and I see stuff in my DNA from my maternal side that I don't see in her. And I see stuff in her DNA that I don't see in her aunt, our aunt, um, which is her mother, my grandmother's full sister. Um, and like it just shows different DNA from different angles. And I had to download hers after mine to upload it to the Your True Ancestry and stuff. Um, but I hadn't tried taking it to a specific to African ancestry site just because to me that knowing it was the Sudan was enough to me, and also to me knowing that uh, the family line that I had traced and the birth certificates and documentation that I had um, were confirmed within the DNA was what I really wanted. Because for me, um, it's always been very, very important to me not to be Rachel Dolezal. Before Rachel Dolezal was even a thing, it's always been very important to me not to be Rachel Dolezal. And so I had to double check and confirm before it was something I was comfortable with stating, right? But that's the only reason why I've got it. But I do know that there's a couple places I haven't done them. I can't wait for when they're able to identify the ghost DNAs either. It is not about what color your skin is, not about that for African or Indigenous. I do recognize, though, and I think that most people need to, that my experience, no matter what my ancestry is, my experience in the United States is completely different. Yeah, I know social justice, but I didn't want to be that. I didn't want to be trans race. I didn't want to be claiming something I didn't have proof on or something. Um, my experience, no matter what my ancestry is going to be different. I have lots of siblings and friends and cousins and family members who are much darker of skin on different sides, like, are different in different groups and different spaces. My experience is never going to be the same. And there are certain knowledges of racism that I get that they don't. When I look like this and I go into a whites only space or a space that's just a bunch of white people and there's nobody of color, the words that come out people's mouth, right? Like so many people are very quiet about their racism until they think that that's just white people, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I see that a lot too. That's not what I said, King. I'm not using your biblical thought processes anyways. What I said was that Homo erectus leaves Africa. Homo neanderthalis is never in Africa. They're a descendant of Homo erectus. And Homo denisovian never goes into Africa. They're a descendant of Homo erectus. Homo erectus still starts in Africa, right? Yeah, King's been talking without listening. Thank you, baby. Thank you. Um, but yeah, please don't say I'm saying shit I'm not saying, because that's not what I'm saying on any level. And I can tell you that anything that's biblical, I'm definitely not fucking saying. I can't stand that shit. I'll quote it to you to prove your shit wrong. But anything that biblical roots is not something I'm stating. Well, I'm ethically non-monogamous. I just thank you. I'm totally down for friends. Like, I'm not I have military sexual trauma and then a decade and a half of a very abusive marriage. It's very, 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 very difficult for me to trust those who possess penises. And that is not stating that those who possess penises have anything wrong with them. I also love many people who possess penises. I have two children who possess penises and two fathers who possess penises and many friends who possess penises. But I've also been very, very harmed. And so I'm not currently looking for anybody in my life who possesses a penis, because to get to the point of the one person in my life who possesses a penis in a partner position that I have in my life took me like 3 years of first dates saying, nope, sorry, bye. 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 And after 3 years of nope, sorry, bye, I finally found somebody that I went, oh, okay, maybe a second date, right? And only because they see me in a way that nobody else has seen me, and only because of trust, right? And I don't need more, right? But I love people, I love friends, down for long, involved conversations. And I especially value those long conversations or those friendships with those who possess penises that never turn into a sexual thing. Because to me, that is so. I was one of the guys when was growing up. Everybody sees me as female, but I've never really saw myself so much. I've always been two spirit inside. I've always been both male and female inside, and I always spent more time with the dudes than the girls. The girls were weird to me. Okay, when I came into society, right? Because coming in at 12, and but I always have more male friends and female friends until you get to the point where everybody thinks, when it becomes a sexual thing, right? So I have a high value for friendship with men or those who possess penises that doesn't involve physical attraction or doesn't involve an expression of physical attraction, right? Because um, I feel safer. Pretty much everybody who's found me attractive in my life found me attractive as a possession. And pretty much everybody who's found me attractive in my life at some point or another needed me to change to be attractive to them. And pretty much everybody in my life who's ever found me attractive thought that that meant that they should be able to have sex with me whether I wanted them to or not. And so, really, having people in my life who find me attractive or who find my mind attractive or who want to have me in their life but don't want any sexual contact with me gives me the ability to reevaluate how I view people who possess penises, right? Gives me the ability to once again have friendships that I haven't had since I got tits, right? Once again, be able to connect with the dude side of me without somebody thinking that I still have a pussy, right? So I would absolutely love and value a friendship, especially one that doesn't need me to be single to have it, right? Especially one that's a friendship, a real friendship that's not about maybe I can get something later. Because I haven't left my house willingly for a couple of years. That's how traumatized I am by penis possessors. I went to a bar 6 months ago, and one of the women in my partner's friend group had gotten loud in my face, and the descriptions were triggering for me. And so I'd had to leave, and I wasn't doing okay. I have a hard time in crowds, anyways. And my partner, when I come back in, was trying to massage my shoulders. He was trying to calm me down. He's standing half behind me, trying to calm me down. Some dude comes from across the bar and starts massaging my shoulders. People touch me in public for some fucking reason, right? People like, like it's just not, uh, yeah. I go out in public and people think that it's okay to scream at me, like right? So, okay. So have not been paying attention. Thank you, everybody. And yes, Ken Leonard, it's a quote from Columbus. It is specifically, I mean, it's not my verbiage. I would not, and you know, but it is Columbus's verbiages. Thank you. Yes, the tattoo on my neck is Irish Gaelic for speak out, and it is written in Ogham. Oh, I'm sorry, YouTube. Let me put you back where you're supposed to be. Maybe. And then I have on my ankle, I have step up. Thank you, mixed. I do appear to be European. This is an armor that I use, right? I do appear to be European. You know, I was thinking about this today actually. I didn't realize I wasn't fully indigenous until I was 12 and hit Swin. So my first 5 years are in Fidalgo among the Haida. Most of the people I grew up with look like me. Light brown, brown hair. My sisters who are Haida look like me. Light eyes, right? Um, at 5 to 10, we lived in the middle of the woods, and we'd have people come in. We'd go back home. We'd go back to Fidalgo, Anacortes, and then we had sun dancers who would come in, and we would have other people who would come into the lodge that my mother built, right? And most of them were lighter. I mean, that's what colonialism has done. So we go back to Fidalgo at 10, and I'm again among a community that looks very much like me. And then my parents moved us to the edge of Swinomish. A lot of people in Swin are darker. It's the first time I had ever heard that I wasn't indigenous, right? It was the first time I had ever been told by somebody, you're not indigenous. Right? So I know I look European, but I only look European by our standard of what European's supposed to look like, right? Really, Contra? Like, didn't what? Did not that? Did not speak? Did not write in his journals? Right, right. I know a lot of people growing up, but it also like and it depends on where you go too, right? It's really dependent on location, right? I've never understood where people got off telling me who I was. I do understand why at 12 when so I was told growing up that my father was part Cherokee and part French. This was the man my mother thought was my father. He's not my father anyways. But that's what I was told. And so I could understand the Cherokee part just because everybody claims Cherokee princess. Um, but and my other knowledge was wrong, and I will state that. Like, what my grandmother had been told about her father was wrong. He left when she was 9, and what she had been told about his heritage, I don't think that it was wrong. I think what she heard, I think that they were told Anakanasta, which is Nani's grandfather, but because they were in Nebraska, she heard Oglala, and that's what she passed down. And so that was incorrect. And I had to go and find that for myself, right? But at 12, I didn't know that, right? This is very true social justice. Well, and our idea of what white is actually just Northern European, right? Because Caucasian is actually relatively dark, right? Caucasian is typically darker than I am, right? I think that you're right. The idea that not only they all look the same, but the idea that they all are the same, right? The idea that it doesn't matter if you're from Spain or you're from Norway, that your religion, your thought process, and your actions are all the same. Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Yeah, mixed. Yeah, I see that. Well, and I also, I mean, like that paper genocide where people are labeled as black in the roles rather than indigenous. That's one of the reasons that we're dealing with this, right? Or where people are labeled as white rather than indigenous, right? That paper genocide that's coming through is really really heavy in that. Absolutely. I apologize, Senator. I'm not calling you. Uh, and I think that it's important to be able to verbalize what you would prefer to be called. What your identity identifies as, right? I think that that's an important lesson that I think that we've all kind of learned within the last 10 or so years, that it's important that your identity is what is identified with, whether that's a gender identity or something else, right? That doesn't mean trans race is okay still. Just saying, just saying. That makes sense, Irma. Well, in many ethnicities, when they get here, we're not considered white. It's not until it's not until the end of the Civil War. And again, that's because you have an influx of Black people from the South, uh, and you have groups of people who have been marginalized by their what was at the time even called race, like the Irish race, um, marginalized by that. I mean, the Irish in Ireland dealt with horrific conditions, right? And when they came over here, they were dealing with people who already saw them as less because they were descendants of British who saw them as less, right? Um, and the colonialism of Ireland, goes back to 1,000, right? Like the Irish were colonized in 1,000. So, well, and they suffered from different colonialisms before that as well. But you absolutely see that you see even the slurs that are used tradition or today for people of color are used against the Irish and the Italians. Absolutely. And you absolutely see that it is when slavery ends and you see an influx of people into the north who are darker of skin, you start to see white becoming white. White becomes white, right? I have heard or have talked to one person who claims that their ancestry, an indentured servant, married a black slave. Um, I don't know. The stuff that that person was saying around that was really erasing chattel slavery trauma and stating that her white ancestors had to deal with the chattel slavery trauma too, and stuff like that. And when other people looked at the stuff that she was claiming, it didn't pan out. So I don't know about that. I'm not stating that it probably didn't happen from time to time. Indentured servitude stops when America becomes the United States. Indentured servitude is I break the law in England, and England signs me up for a contract of service and sends me to the United States to a penal colony. Okay. Um, Indentured servitude, nobody is sending British criminals to the United States. And indentured servitude is something a lot of times you sign yourself into or you sign your children into. It is the same thing as apprenticeship in many areas, right? But the psychology of indentured servitude comes from pre-chattel slavery, which is capture in a raid or something illegal, and you owe a term of service to somebody else, a term of service that doesn't pass down to your children. Slavery as chattel slavery passes down to your children. Indentured servitude and chattel slavery therefore become two very different things. And indentured servitude you can enter into voluntarily. Chattel slavery is not something you've entered into voluntarily. The Pacific slave trade. Are you talking about slave trade among indigenous people, or are you talking about Spaniards bringing slaves to the Pacific or across the Pacific? Are you talking about? Can you clarify just a little bit what you're asking on the Pacific slave trade? I might know it and just not by that thought process, but I don't know. Yeah, after your indenture, you're free. Now, that's not to say that indentured servitude wasn't taken advantage of. It absolutely was. But your children were never slaves or servants. They weren't indentured, right? So, say I come over as an Irish indentured servant prior to what is it, 1778. Okay. See, I come over prior to 1778 as an Irish indentured servant. Um, I'm sure if you trace it back far enough, that's probably actually part of how it got here. But say I come over prior to 1778 as an Irish indentured servant. And when I come over as an Irish indentured servant, I get assigned to a landowner who's a fucktard. And so he charges me for my room and my board. And he charges me like a daily rent or like daily on top of that, right? Like, so I'm constantly indebted to him, and that debt extends my indenture. This happens all the fucking time. Still not chattel slavery. Your child, if that man then assaults me, which was illegal for him to do to an indentured servant, but not illegal for him to do to a slave. Okay. If that man SAs me and I bear a child, that child is free. If that man SAs somebody who is a chattel slave, and again, it's legal for him to do that and not legal for him to essay an indentured servant, but the resulting child then becomes a slave. So this is where we see this huge difference between indentured servitude, which is the 13th Amendment also, by the way. So the United States doesn't have indentured servants until the 13th Amendment. The 13th Amendment is indentured servitude. Because the 13th Amendment states that nobody shall be held in slavery unless they've broken some law and therefore are able to be enslaved. That's what the 13th Amendment states. So let me read that. Oh, okay, we're talking over in Australia. Wait a minute, I think those are two people, two different people. Okay. Currently, your birth certificate's a stock that they trade. Totally believe that. There's lots of evidence for that. Absolutely. Currently, there's a lot of, but their power and control is in a different area, or like the way they maintain power and control is a little bit different. It doesn't mean that there's not a lot of evidences and uh, TikTok has gone down. February 21st. Hello, if you're coming over, let's go ahead and I'm gonna go ahead and post a video on TikTok so people know. Once again, life access is suspended. It says the 21st. I appealed it. I'm going to double down on stating the fact that chattel slavery and indentured servitude are two very fucking different things, and that um, currently, yes, we are dealing with chattel slavery, or not chattel slavery, with indentured servitude with the 13th Amendment. So, if you don't like my anti racism, maybe you should just scroll on. Otherwise, maybe you should sit and listen for a while, close your mouth, open your ears. Have a great one, everyone. Oh, and you know where to find me. I'm still going. I want to make sure and get captions in there and everything else. Give me just 1 second. Yikes. I can't spell. Okay, there we go. Um, yeah. Yes. They suspended me in the middle of differentiating the two. They're so good at that, aren't they? Like, I swear to fucking God, every time they come across, like, I'm always constantly, it's never for something like, okay, so I remember like maybe the second live I did, I got suspended because somebody was like, he was so rude with his Christianity, and he was like, "You just hate Christians," and I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I do. Like, I think you're all fucking evil. Yeah, I hate Christians." And he was completely offended by the idea that I hated Christians, and I was like, "Yeah, that's not gonna work." And I was like, "What the fuck?" But I realized then that like I couldn't go off, and that's part of the reason why I try and make sure that my comments are extremely like polite and like it's teaching and educational instead of like telling somebody to fuck off when really what I want to do is tell somebody they're being a total asshole and they can fuck right the fuck off, right? But it's almost always because I have said something along the lines of teaching anti-race theory or teaching that, it's always I've said something's too scientific for someone. It's almost always like I've said something too scientific for somebody and they're like, "Oh no, 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 that's impossible. That is not who we are. We all came from God," and it's like, okay, okay. It's either the racist or the anti-scientists usually, and so okay, whatever. But that also means I can smoke because as far as I know, YouTube doesn't fucking give a shit I smoke. And it tends to be a little bit quieter over here. It was really commenty and I was ignoring most of it. I don't know. I was trying to ignore most of it and it was working pretty well. Um, but I think, the main things that I wanted to talk about today were the fact that, after reviewing everything and after looking at everything, I think that what Jane Elliott did is really problematic. And I think that if she's not going to step up, and when an Indigenous person says, "Hey, this is harming us," make some changes. And not only that, but, to like, and putting the word Native American in quotations just is contributing to erasure, right? So it's just saying that you don't believe they exist anyways, right? So, um, really, I just wanted to be able to hold space for knowledge of who we were pre-colonization, and knowledge that, well, Jane is absolutely not stating that Turtle Island Indigenous people were Black when people arrived. Um, she absolutely, states that, nobody's, that nobody's white at the time, right? So, if she's stating that nobody's white, nobody's Black, then she's not saying that Indigenous people are Black, right? Um, but it's still so problematic in its wording. And I think it was Leonai, who stated that, she's so precise, and she states that she's so precise, and she states in other things that being precise is important. And so if she states that being precise is important in other things, and then she is so precise in her wording, and she so precisely doesn't precisely say that Turtle Island Indigenous people are Turtle Island Indigenous people, right? That it's, all the levels of problematic. Um, Oh, I didn't do any articles. I watched her stuff. I just YouTubed it. I went and I made sure that it was stuff that wasn't all like cut up. I watched the table talk. The red table talk is like 4 years old. The most recent thing I found was her in the red shirt with the glasses. And I only took a clip, a few minutes of it. There might be a couple of different things from that people have been pointing out, or parts that they have seen, because it was like an hour and a half long interview, but it was on YouTube. Um, I'll pull it up. I don't want to I'm not going to post it on the website or anything because I don't want to, because of the fact that the language is problematic. I don't want to give it more traction, right? Because I agree that the language is so problematic. I don't want to give it more traction by posting it on the website, something that somebody else might come in and see. Hey, Bethany. This one is the one that I took the cut from. The Red Table Talk is on YouTube as well. And then there's a couple of other interviews. And I didn't watch all of them. I did watch the Red Table Talk, and the way she phrases in the Red Table Talk is better, but it's before this one, as far as I know. So if it's better and she's gone worse, what the fuck? Well, shit. Unless they win the appeal by tomorrow, this also means I won't be able to do my live at noon tomorrow. I'm trying to see. It gets freezy over here, doesn't it? Okay, it's up. Yeah, but that might mean that we won't be live tomorrow at noon. TikTok is such a weird space. Like, it's a great space for exposure. I think it's one of the best places for exposure at this particular moment, but it's so trolly, and it's so problematic on so many levels, right? Like all of this anti just everything. I don't know, social media can be so like, oh, anyways, I think. But yeah. Um, I just yeah. Bethany, do I know you in real life? Because your name makes me think of a beautiful human being I know from a few years ago when I lived in a different town. Yeah. Good for making ads, good for exposure, good for, but like trying to deal with the over term is really weird. And the level of troll and hate that goes on it, I mean, I have to say, like, I know that I don't like social media, and so I think that that's part of my thought process, but another part of my thought process of kind of, stepping it down and going back towards the writing a little bit more. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I can feel that. I can understand that. I knew a beautiful young woman, who was, like, a couple years older than my daughter a few years ago in Eastern Oregon, and her name was Bethany Ann, uh Tilling as well, and I was like, "Wait a minute, like, is that, is that the same person?" She's on my Facebook, and I'm like, "Is that the same person?" Um, and so I was like, I was wondering. But, when I decided that I wanted to step it back a little bit, a lot of it is the fact that it just gets so trolly, and I'm just really after being doxxed in 2020 and seeing other people doxxed in 2020, I, really don't want to put that much, like, danger out there, right? Yeah. Well, and you seem to have the same, like, energy that she did that's just very beautiful and very bright, and I love that. So, yeah, I think that that's I think names sometimes give energy, so it makes total sense to me. Um, but I don't wanna be out there so much because I feel like I definitely don't wanna be the person that walking down the street, you know my face, right? No, I haven't. I haven't checked the mail today. I'll check the mail this afternoon. I haven't checked the mail in a minute. I'm horrible about checking the mail. And I totally forgot you had sent a package. Like, I think, yeah, like I remember talking to you about it. I just totally forgot. I'm horrible about checking the mail, but I will look today. Um, yeah, I just don't want to be the person that you can tell who I am walking down the street because I feel like that would put me and my family in serious amounts of danger, right? Like it just all the hate that people seem to feel anyways is like there's a lot of love and I love all the love. Like I've met so many amazing, beautiful people and everything else, but like and not but I love all of that. Like I really feel that beauty and that connection. And I'm so grateful for it. And I have to say that there have been people on TikTok and people Modern Warriors Your White shit probably made me feel more indigenous, like the fallout from that, like what happened from that. I think that made me feel more not more indigenous, but like more right to say that I was indigenous. Like it gave me more security, I think, than anything ever had. Like I think that watching everybody come out at that point and the way that native TikTok reacted at that point was so healing for me, right? So there has been a lot of beautiful healing instances for me on TikTok, but at the same point, I'm like, oh my God, all these trolls, stay away from me. Go troll somewhere else. Don't find me. Just because it gets so, just because it's already so violent. I went to the hospital the other day to do my iron, and as I was coming out, people are screaming at each other. Like everywhere I go, it feels like these days people are screaming at each other constantly. Awesome. I will keep an eye out for if it's not here today, I'll keep an eye out over the next couple days too. I just want people to stop like I'm so tired of being afraid to go out in public. I'm working on it, but I'm so tired of it. Uh I do have yeah, I'm going to go because I have an appointment in a few minutes. Um if I can't get on at noon tomorrow on TikTok, I'll put out a video and I'll come over on here and do it here instead for those who, want to do the live. Um because TikTok is TikTok. Uh, Otherwise, I will be over on TikTok at noon tomorrow. Um, we'll see from there. Have much love, you guys, and I hope your guys' day is beautiful and blessed. And Bethany, I will definitely go and check. Um, and I'll see you guys soon.